Welcome to this detailed playthrough of a turn of Legends of Kaladeja, Heroes of the Heragul. I'm Jason, the creator of the game, and what you see in front of you here is what you might see after one turn of gameplay. Warships in Kaladeja are not lumbering battleships, they're actual spacecraft, which can reach 20,000 kilometers per hour or more, depending on what planet they happen to be orbiting. So combat in this game starts really fast, really quick, and in some cases it can begin even on turn 1, depending on how aggressive the players are. Now, in Heroes of the Heragul, each turn accounts for approximately 15 minutes or so of real time. And just like in first edition, each turn is broken down into phases. The first phase is going to be the initiative phase. So let me get my dice tray out here. Each player would roll one die. So Surakari, they're going to go ahead. Whoop, doesn't roll the die tail, but that's all right. They rolled a 1. The Heragul Empire then, they rolled a 6. So in this case, the Heragul Empire would win the initiative, and they would have the choice to either act first or have one of the Surakari warships act first. But before to get to that point, we move on to the second phase of the turn, which is the sensor phase. Now each warship generates a certain amount of sensor points per turn, and later on when guns start firing, these sensor points can be used to re-roll attacks that miss. In this particular fleet setup here, the Surakari generate 8 sensor points per turn, so they obviously have a lot more than the Heragul, because that's always been one of the traits of the Surakari. So let's see, there's 5, 6, 7, and 8. Oops, that's the damage side. And the Heragul Empire, they generate 4 sensor points per turn. So in this case, there's definitely a pretty nice advantage for the Surakari. Since the Heragul did win the initiative, they get to place down their sensor points first. And now one of the interesting things about the sensor phase is that by the fact you're placing down these sensor points before any warship acts, it kind of betrays your tactics a little bit. So in this case, the Heragul are going to place their sensor points on the Delphinus way over here on the flank, as well as the Destroyer, mainly because of where their warships are placed and where they're facing. Those are the two most likely targets. But now this, of course, shows the Surakari that those are probably going to be their primary targets for the turn, and the Surakari player can react and try to account for that. Likewise, as the Surakari places their tokens down, naturally they're going to place some on the battlecruiser, because the battlecruiser is the big boy with lots of firepower and heavier armor. But at the same time, over here on this flank, we have an Heragul Mackerel frigate. The Mackerel frigate is an anti-aircraft frigate great at shooting down fighters. If the Surakari player wants to take fighter superiority in this battle, they have to take that ship out. Otherwise, they're never going to get it. So 4 sensor tokens are going to go on the Heragul frigate. Now it's going to be time for each player to start activating warships. So we'll begin with the Heragul Empire. They're not in the best tactical position right now because of the speed their warships are traveling at. But the main thing they want to think about here is when they have a battlecruiser on the table, your main objective is keep that ship alive for as long as possible. It's a big target. The enemy is going to put a lot of firepower into it. And even though it can take a number of hits, 1 or 2 lucky hits is going to really mess that ship up as easily as a light ship. So for the first step, they're going to activate their battlecruiser and try to get him out of harm's way with doing as much damage as possible. Now, he's not moving very fast. It's kind of at an extreme range that it'll finish Surakari frigate over here, but he's going to try to put as much firepower in that ship as he possibly can. Primarily the Delphinus. The Delphinus is an anti-missile frigate. It's very great at shooting down the Javelin missile tokens, 2 of which are hovering right over here at the moment. But it's a great way for the Surakari to neutralize some of the Heragul's most effective firepower. So the current velocity of the Heragul battlecruiser is between 10 and 12 inches, and he's going to select a port turn. Now a port turn is going to let him turn his combat arc to the left side of his token, bringing his guns to this side of the battlefield, which is where the Delphinus is relative to him. However, he's also going to spend a reactor token to activate his vectored thrusters. This is going to give him 1 extra engine point for his particular ship to do additional turns. And he's going to probably use that at the end of the phase to give himself a little bit more of a velocity going this way towards this side of the battlefield, because chances are that's where the rest of his ships are going. You want to try to keep your squadron together in Legends of Kaladeja, Heroes of the Heragul. Alright, so let's see. He's just going to go ahead and move forward 12 inches. And one thing you can do in Heroes of the Heragul is you can always pre-measure things. So you can get an idea about where you're going to be and see if you actually have a decent range. Well, oh man, that's tough. He's in a tough spot right now. So he's not in a very good tactical spot, but let's see what happens, right? So 12 inches out, we can go ahead and measure that. So we're going to pick up his base. We'll fly him out about 12 inches. And now one thing I should note about these miniatures here, I have magnetized them to where they can rotate around their flight stand. That is not a requirement for playing Heroes of the Heragul. There are markings on the actual token himself that let you divide the combat arcs effectively and cleanly. So this little rotational thing I'm doing here in the miniatures is really just for extra cinematography effect. You know what I mean. It makes it look cooler. All right, and then as he moves along, the fighters will move with him. And what he is going to do, he's going to fire his weapons first, and then he's actually going to go ahead and turn a little bit. Because in Heroes of the Heragul, you can fire your weapons at any point during your movement. Unfortunately, he doesn't have very good range. He's at about 10.5 inches to the finis, which means he can only fire his big fire rails at the target. He can't fire his little fire guns. Fire cannons that only have an 8-inch range. So, first 2 shots to the Delphinus. Every weapon system, when it's undamaged, needs a 3+ to hit, at least for the big capital ship weapons. That's 2 hits. All right. Now, each fire rail has a power value of 4, which that means, as we go into rolling for critical hits here, he's going to be rolling 8 dice to try to do critical hits to that Delphinus. Now, this one, the Delphinus has the option to spend a reactor point to overcharge its armor and reduce this by half. Now, the thing in this to consider before he does that, he's not going to do it. And the reason for that is even though that would remove 4 dice from this pool, at most, because only 2 guns hit the Delphinus, only 2 critical hits can possibly be inflicted. And with a 4+ chance of a critical hit, even by spending reactor points to reduce this by half, there's still a pretty good chance the Heragul warship is going to go ahead and do 2 critical hits to Delphinus. So he's just going to not spend the energy and take all 8 dice. And wow, that was a bad roll, but the Delphinus has a critical value of 4+, and 2 4+s were rolled out of 8 dice, which is very poor, but that results in 2 critical hits being applied to the Delphinus warship. Now, being a little light warship like that, the Delphinus doesn't have any way to really minimize damage, and he just takes a hit as it is. So the first one is armor damaged. Oh, this is a brutal one. Armor damaged basically limits that warship to only overcharging its armor once per turn. And the second one, engines damage, is another very devastating hit. So light warships have no way to mitigate these critical hits at all, and they can get ripped apart pretty fast. Those are 2 very devastating hits to the Delphinus. Engines damage reduces his engine points for maneuvering by half. And now the Heragul battlecruiser has 1 more fire rail he can fire at that particular frigate. But let me see, does he have range to the destroyer? Because he's already done some pretty heavy damage to the Delphinus. If he's got range to the destroyer, which he does, he wants to put that fire rail into that ship to try to do a pretty solid hit to it as well. So he's going to fire now at the destroyer over here, the Corona. He rolled a 1, which is a miss, but there are sensor points on the target. Let's take one of those sensor points off and see if he can re-roll this and turn it into a hit. A 5. That is a solid hit. Now, a solid hit is a special thing that occurs with certain weapons, like the fire rail. Instead of what I did just a moment ago, where I built a pool of power dice and I rolled those to see about critical hits, a fire rail, when it rolls a solid hit, automatically does a critical hit to the ship that it strikes. So the Corona just automatically takes a critical hit, which in this case, weapon damage. That's another powerful one. Basically, all critical damage is very powerful and very deadly in Heroes of the Heragul. In particular, weapon damage is really ugly because it's going to cause one of his weapon systems to basically not function very well. Let's roll a die and see which one that is. Oh, 1 is the heavy plasma pulse beam on the destroyer. That's his biggest weapon, just got damaged. Now it basically is a lot less accurate come combat time. And the last thing the Heragul, last 2 things the battlecruiser can do is 1, it has arc cannons, which are anti-fighter weapon. There are 3 fighters chilling around over here. It's got a long 15-inch Vulcan cannon range. So he's going to target this fighter squadron right here, or fighter wing that's escorting the Corona, and it's got 6 dice. He needs 5 pluses to do some damage. Just keep that like that. All right. So we got a 6 on an anti-fighter weapon is automatic kill. So let's take this guy right off the board. Now, anti-fighter weapons damage the target as well as any enemy fighters within 3 inches as well. So both those fighters are within 3 inches of the original target, so additional damage dice can be applied to them as well. And we have 2 5+, which means a 5+ is a hit from an arc cannon, which results in a fighter disruption. Disruption doesn't have any permanent effects on a fighter, but it does limit their mobility and their effectiveness at the time. So both those fighters have been disrupted. I'm going to put a little damage token on them, indicating that that is the case. And then finally, the Heragul battlecruiser is going to launch a pair of javelin missiles. And later on in the turn, these will move and do some damage. Now that the Heragul battlecruiser has fired his weapons, he wants to make a few turns. He has not spent any of his engine points or his 1 thruster point that he activated using his thrusters. And now at the end of his turns, as he's done moving, he can actually make all 3 of his turns right in a row. Now, considering the fact that he selected a port turn maneuver, his turns have to be to the port side. Now, granted, the vector thruster could allow him to do other actions, but he's just going to use that vector thruster point to make 1 additional port turn. Normally, if you make your turns throughout your movement, you have to move a certain distance between each turn, but because of the fact this movement, or this turning is occurring at the end of his movement, he can make all his turns right in a row. So he gets 3 turns, and we just go ahead and go 1, 2, 3. Now, unfortunately, he really wanted to turn to the starboard side because that would kind of better match the flow of his squadron. But in order to bring his guns to bear on the target he wanted to shoot at, he has to turn to the port side. And these are one of the things you have to consider all the options when choosing your tactic for the squadron. Now it's time for the Heragul to activate one of their warships or some of their fighters. Now, ideally, they would want to activate this Corona destroyer because we know it's the one being targeted by the Heragul ships. But with its 1 critical hit that it just suffered, it lost its main weapon. It didn't lose it, but it damaged it and it makes it less likely to hit. So instead, they're going to activate this Corona destroyer and go hunt down their Mackerel. And before I do that, I should mention one thing, that in Heroes of the Heragul, every critical hit you inflict on a warship also inflicts 1 point of hull damage. Now, hull damage is basically how a warship gets destroyed. In the case of the Delphinus over here, he has 7 points, and the Coronas have 11 points of hull damage. So with 2 critical hits on the Delphinus, it's already approximately 25% way towards being destroyed. There's a little bit of variability in terms of how warships are destroyed. So the Corona here is going to activate. Its current velocity is 12 to 14 inches. So let's see what it's going to do. It's going to select the port turn. So it brings its guns along this side and ideally fly straight and make a bunch of turns right here at the end to bring itself around to go after more warships. So where's 14 inches put it? All right, it's going to do its full 14-inch movement. That'll put it right here. And because now its firing arc is on this side of the token, we have the Mackerel in sight. And plenty of range for all of its guns. And in a moment here, its escorting fighters will move as well. I'll just kind of put them over here to remember to move them back in the right spot. But it's often easiest to complete the warship's movement all together and then put the escorting fighters where they need to be. All right. It's firing time. Same kind of process we saw with the Heragul ships here. The first weapon on the Corona is a heavy plasma pulse beam, 1 weapon, 3+ to hit. That's a hit. It does 3 power dice to do a critical. The Corona is not going to the Mackerel is not going to overcharge its armor. And we need to roll 1 4+ to do a critical hit. There we go. So the Mackerel, hull damage, that takes an extra point of hull damage to the ship. The Mackerel was carrying the reinforced armor card. The reinforced armor card, what you saw right there a moment ago, where I drew the hull damaged card, the reinforced armor card actually negates that because it's a 1-point upgrade that negates the first critical hit card drawn against that ship. Next up, a pair of medium plasma pulse beams. Once again, 3 pluses. 2 misses, but there's lots of sensor points on the target. Take 2 of those off and re-roll these 2 dice. And we got 2 hits, and that's going to result in 4 power dice. Now, at this point, the Mackerel is going to overcharge its armor. So it's going to go from 4 power dice to do criticals down to only 2 power dice to do criticals. And I need 4 pluses because that's the critical value of the Mackerel. In that case, it's got 1 more critical hit on it. Next, engines damaged. Oh boy, that card's coming up a lot this turn. I think there's only 4 of those in the deck, but it's apparently coming up quite a bit. So that was another solid hit there on the Mackerel. And now, little guns time. 4 plasma cannons, 4 dice, 3 pluses. We have 2 hits and 2 misses. Now at this point, we still have plenty of heavy weapons in the fleet of the Surikari, sorry, in the squadron of the Surikari. So I'm not going to use sensor points to re-roll the 2 then miss. These are only your basic 1 damaged weapons. The Mackerel at this point is like, it's kind of a little leery as to whether it should actually overcharge its armor or not. But it's not going to do so. So 2 dice, because 1 for each plasma cannon, 4 pluses. Unfortunately, that was a bad decision, but you never really know that at the time. That's 2 more critical hits from the Corona. Weapon damaged, and a second weapon damaged. All right, well, the first weapon that gets damaged is 6. What would that be on the Mackerel? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's his, I believe it's turret-mounted. No, that's his forward-mounted or combat-mounted fire cannons. Number 2 would be 2. That's also its forward-mounted fire cannons. How critical weapon damage rolls work is they kind of count around the weapon battery on the card, because on a warship stat card, the weapon batteries are around. So therefore, the heaviest weapons could potentially get damaged a little bit easier than the not-so-heavy weapons. So this guy just blew off its combat arc mounted fire cannons. They're completely destroyed. And that did 2 more points of hull damage to the ship. So let's put the weapon destroyed card over there under its stat card. Engines damage needs to go over there as well. All right, and finally, when we get back to doing some of the damage here, the Corona's got 2 more plasma cannons to fire. That's 2 solid hits, but in the case of the plasma cannons, a solid hit does not particularly matter. And does it want to take a risk again? It's already taken a lot of damage at this point. Look at the numbers here. The Mackerel has already taken about half of its hull damage it can possibly take for a risk blowing up. So it's going to spend 1 more reactor token to drop that down to only 1 critical die, which unfortunately does still cause a critical hit. But it's better than 2. And its thrusters are damaged as well. So not only is engines damaged, but its thrusters are damaged as well, reducing their effectiveness by 50%. And that's going to bring the end to the firing of the Corona. And it's time now for it to finish its turns, which the Corona has an engine value of 4. It's not going to bother activating thrusters. It's currently at a B turning rate. So it's going to just do 4 turns in place, kind of like what the battlecruiser did just a moment ago. And there's 4. So it's a little bit of turning to bring it a line to do a little bit of a wide sweeping turn for the next activation. And Hammerhead over here in the corner is going to go after the Surikari Delphinus right there. And its current velocity is 14 to 16 inches with a B turn. And now when you move with a B turn, what you have to do is move 3 inches between each turn, unless of course it's the end of your movement, as you've seen several times throughout this turn, throughout the explanation here. So it's going to execute a port turn like that, and then we're going to make 1 turn, and he has 4 engine points to spend. He's not going to use his vector thrusters, so let's go ahead and move him 3 inches. Clear little fighters out of the way at the moment. Fighters just move out of the way if a warship tries to move on top of them like that. And we've got three turns left. 3 turns left and 13 inches of movement. All right, there's turn number 2. Let's go 3 more inches of movement. And we want to make sure that he can still fire at the Delphinus. Because, of course, now here his firing arc is going to be over here on this side of the battlefield. And it looks like at the moment, after 3 turns, he's still good. But he's going to turn back just a tiny bit. So he's not going to do a full B turn. And he's moved 6 inches so far, which gives him a possibility of 10 more inches, which is enough to get him up and close, right up there. He's going to fire in against that Delphinus, and then he's going to do 2 more turns after he does his firing. 3 fire cannons mounted in his combat arc. Looking for 3 pluses to hit. Wow, that's awful. Okay, that is how you don't shoot a weapon in Heragul, in Heroes of the Heragul. Yeah. So anyway, there's 2 sensor points on the Delphinus. Fortunately, there's no more big, heavy guns to fire. So he's going to reroll 2 of those, 3 pluses. There we go. That's better. All right, that's 2 hits. The Delphinus is going to overcharge its armor. Where is he at over here? He's right here. Delphinus overcharging his armor to only give it a 50% chance of doing a critical hit, which is really unfortunate, but that's how things work sometimes. But it's still a critical hit for the Heragul. Weapon damage. Ooh, there's a lot of weapon damage cards in the damage deck, so it's a very common thing to see it come up. In fact, it's by far the single most common card in the damage deck. 2, that's going to be some of the forward-mounted or combat arc-mounted plasma cannons on the Delphinus. So let's slide that under here and give it 1 more point of hull damage because it was, once again, a critical hit. All right, second battery of 3 fire cannons. Heragul did get lucky with his attack a little bit. Thrusters jammed. Like I said, every critical damage is really messy and ugly. Thrusters jam is going to prevent the Delphinus from doing any sort of kind of fancy maneuvers with his thrusters. He can only do what his main engine, what's called his primary action, can do. But more details about that can be found in the Heroes of the Heragul rulebook. And finally, the last few steps here for the Heragul Hammerhead is 1, he's got a pair of javelin missiles to launch out. Unfortunately, he didn't take out the anti-missile system on the Delphinus, so those can go down pretty easily next turn, or possibly this turn if the Delphinus is a flyby. And his anti-fighter weapon only has a 6-inch range. There's no fighters within range he can shoot, so he can't use that as well. Let's finish with the Hammerhead's moves, which involves doing 2 more B turns in place at the end of his movement. So 1, 2. And there we go. And then let's move our javelin missiles back to where they should be. All right, now we're going to go back over to the Sorakare's activation. And this time we know that the Hammerhead and Battlecruiser have already activated. They're not going anywhere right now. So that means all that's left to activate is this poor Mackerel that's already been slammed pretty good. The Draco over here, it has no good firing solution against the Mackerel that won't leave it in a bad position for a future turn. So instead, it's going to activate its thrusters along with its main engines, and it's just going to do a very sharp port turn. Oh, that's a javelin missile token. I want a reactor token. It's going to do a very sharp port turn and go after either the Battlecruiser or the Hammerhead over here, because that's really all it can do at this point. But before that happens, there is something that comes into play here. From the first turn, the Heragul launched a pair of javelin missiles out against this target, and they are both currently in contact here with the Draco. Now, how these missiles work at the beginning of the Draco's activation, as soon as they start to move, if those missiles are still there, they're going to explode and do damage. So the Draco has to use his anti-fighter weapons, or any fighters that are escorting him, to shoot those missiles down. Unfortunately, he has no fighter escorts, so he's going to try to shoot the missiles down with his anti-fighter weapons. It has a 2-dice anti-fighter weapon, and because they're missiles, he has to roll 6s to shoot them down. Neither one gets shot down, they both go in, they explode, and they immediately do damage to the Draco. And yes, it has happened to where these missile hits have blown up a warship before it even is able to activate. In fact, javelin missiles are very good at being fired at crippled warships to try to have that happen. That's a very good tactic for them. All right, each javelin missile goes in with 1 die. The damage is simultaneous, but because these are individual weapon batteries by the rules, overcharging this armor against 2 single power die batteries has no real effect. So we're going to roll them both at the same time. Frigates have critical values of 4 pluses, and see what happens. 1 critical hit the Draco. This could actually radically affect what happens to the ship. Thrusters damaged. That's a good hit. So it's 1 point of hull damage to the Draco, and its thrusters are damaged, which of course is going to reduce its ability to maneuver a little bit, especially some of the more fancier maneuvers that require thrusters to do. It's got a total of 6 engine points to spend, with a speed of 12 to 14 inches at the moment. And once again, with a B turn, it turns, and it's got to move 3 inches forward. So there's 1 turn remaining at 12 inches. It's only got 2 more inches to travel. That's all it really needs. There we go. All right, so that's where it ended up at this point. Let's see what it's got. Range. He is within 8 inches of the Battlecruiser, which, well, that's good for now. He can get his little guns on it, but next turn it basically means he can vaporize with the Battlecruiser. Let's resolve some combat against the battlecruisers. The Draco has a pair of immediate plasma pulse beams, looking for 3 pluses as usual. There is still sensor points on the battlecruiser. Reroll the one that hit, and bam, that was a hit. So 2 hits, that's 4 power dice going at the battlecruiser. Now the Heragul battlecruiser has a special ability called Advanced Active Armor. It is available only to the Heragul, and because of that at the moment, he's not going to overcharge his armor. He's going to take these 4 dice and see what happens. Now the battlecruiser is a little bit heavier. It needs a 5+ to do a critical hit to the battlecruiser. Ooh, well, okay. So we have 2 successes against the battlecruiser right now, which obviously aren't any good. So the Advanced Active Armor has 3 basic tokens put on it at the beginning of any given turn, and it sticks around until they're used up. And in this case, it's going to use 2 of those tokens up to reroll both of the 2 successful power dice. And this is going to force the Surikari player to try to significantly reduce the chances of a critical hit. Now, 1 still was a success after a reroll, so the battlecruiser still takes 1 critical hit. So that's an example of an upgrade card that you can add to your Heragul squadron to make them a little more resilient against heavy weapons. And sensors damage ×1. Well, the battlecruiser is going to go ahead and take that 1. That's not a seriously awful critical damage, but he's just going to take it. And the reason why I say he's just going to take it is you're going to see in a moment here probably that the Heragul, or the bigger ships, have some resilience in terms of taking critical damage. They can choose a little bit to ignore once per turn a really nasty critical hit card like engines damage or weapons damage or something like that. All right, Draco, 3 plasma cannons in the combat arc. That's 2 hits. He's not going to reroll that because there's still some heavier ships to fire at it. So, battlecruiser. Man, don't bother with the overcharging armor. 1 success. Does he want to force the reroll of that? Yeah, might as well. Not like whether now or later. He's going to use his last advanced active armor token and force a reroll. That's still a success though, but it's worth a shot. Weapon damaged. Oh boy. This is where he's got to, does he want to try to negate that card, or does he want to just go ahead and take it? This could be very bad for the battlecruiser, or maybe not so bad. There's already been a lot of thrusters and damaged card, thruster damage and some damaged cards drawn. So the Heragul battlecruiser is going to use his reinforced SI Hall card. This is an upgrade card that applies to a lot of the larger ships. Some of the Surikari ships have it. These Surikari destroyers are something a little bit weaker. But it allows them to basically ignore the effects of a critical hit card once per turn. So that weapon damage card, that is now going to be discarded. But the Heragul battlecruiser is still going to take a point of Hall damage from that hit. All right, 1 more gun on the Surikari Draco to fire. It's a hit. That was actually a 3, but it was still a hit. And a 5+ to critical. Nope. All right. And that's going to end the Surikari Draco's activation. All right, we're back to the Heragul Empire's activation. And what they decided to do is they're going to activate their Mackerel and try to clean up some of the fighters here around the Corona. And possibly then take a few pot shots again at the Draco here. Because unfortunately, the last sensor point is over here against the Corona, and that's pretty much out of the abilities of the Mackerel at the moment because it's taken both engine damage as well as thruster damage. So it's in pretty bad shape. So here we go. Now, like I mentioned before, you can fire your guns at any point during your movement, but first, of course, you got to choose what maneuver you're going to perform. And like the rest of his fleet, he's going to perform a port turn, and then he's going to fire into the Draco before he actually does his movement. But actually, he's only going to fire his anti-fighter weapons at this point. And like the battlecruiser, it carries a 6-gun arc cannon, and it's going to fire at the fighters that are escorting the Corona. Once again, we're looking for 5 pluses to disrupt, 6 pluses to kill. And wow, did he fail. Okay. That's 6 absolute failures. You cannot re-roll attacks against fighters with sensor points, anything like that. Some of the fighters have special rules to re-roll their attacks, but that does not apply to the arc cannon. Fortunately, being an anti-aircraft frigate, it can go ahead and fire a second weapon. Which it has are a pair of fire spreads. These are kind of like small flak guns. It's got 2 of these. These are 4 dice, looking for 4 pluses. Oh my goodness, their Mackerel cannot shoot. So apparently the Mackerel cannot shoot at all at what it's supposed to do, which is shoot down fighters. It just miserably failed right there. we're missing 10 dice. But, okay, well, that's what happens when you come under lots of heavy fire, I guess. Let's see, what is its current velocity set to? The speed of the Mackerel is currently set to 14 by 16. His thrusters are damaged, and he has 1 reactor point left. So he's going to actually activate his thrusters and slow down by 1. Now the thrusters, like I said, a little more flexibility. Normally you would not be able to spend an engine point at that time to slow down using a port turn, but because of the fact that it is thrusters, you have a little more flexibility when things work. All right, let's just go 12 inches. And he's just going to go right here. The 9-inch mark is when he's going to go ahead and fire into the back of the Draco with his 1 functional anti-capital ship weapon. He's got 3 dice, needing 3 pluses to hit. He's just awful, isn't he? All right, 1 hit. He's rolled 13 dice this turn. Is that right? 13 dice this turn and scored 1 successful hit so far. All right, 1 die, 1 power die, see if you get a critical. And he can't do that. So the Heragul Mackerel is going to finish his last 3 inches of movement in disgrace. Those kind of things happen, and you just got to really use fleet tactics to get around him. Okay, next up, the Surikari have elected to activate their little fitness over here. And he's going to have some fun doing some pretty crazy tactics. He's going to fly by and strafe a couple ships, try to shoot down some missiles, maybe do some damage to the battle cruiser, and possibly mess up that Mackerel a little bit more. But Delphinus doesn't have a lot of capital ship weapons on it. It loses a few in exchange for its anti-missile system. So it's going to execute a port turn, because unfortunately its thrusters are jammed, and it can't do a really cool maneuver. Its first action then is just going to be to start moving forward. It can move forward 14 inches. Let's lay down our ruler. And it's not going to turn until, well, let's see. It's going to have to turn at some point here, otherwise it's going to run into its own buddy over here. So let's have it go 10 inches. Let's do 8 inches forward. We'll start turning. All right. So 8 inches. First 8-inch movement here. So we got 6 inches left to move. And as it flies by the hammerhead here, it's going to activate its Phalanx anti-missile system and try to shoot down its javelin missiles. Now, the Phalanx has 4 dice. It's an anti-fighter weapon, but being an anti-missile system, it has a special rule to where it destroys missiles on a 4+ instead of a 6+. And like fighters, you target a single missile and apply damage to other missiles within 3 inches of it. So unfortunately, it can only basically shoot down either the hammerheads or the battlecruiser missiles, but not both. So let's target the hammerheads. 2 4+, and just like that, the anti-missile system did its job and took out the 2 javelin missiles launched by the hammerhead this turn. All right, now we're going to fire our main medium plasma pulse beams into the battlecruiser over here. So we still have 6 inches of movement left. And 2 dice, we need 3 pluses. Well, that's 2 misses. There are still 3 sensor tokens on the battlecruiser, so let's spend 2 of those to re-roll those 2 dice and see what happens. And that translates to 2 hits for 4 power dice. So it's 2 hits, and there's 4 power dice. Now the battlecruiser at the moment over there, he still has plenty of reactor power to spend, so he's going to spend a reactor token and drop that down to only 2 power dice. Let's see what happens. We need 5s. There's a 5. That's going to be a critical hit against the battlecruiser. And now his fancy card has already been used up, so at this point he can get really nervous about taking serious damage. Armor compromised on the topic of serious damage. This warship's critical value is reduced by 1, and if this warship does not have active armor, well, it does, so it just ends up taking an additional point of hull damage. But okay, but it has active armor, so at this point its critical value has now been dropped from 5 to 4, which of course for a big ship like that, well, for any ship, especially a big ship, that's a really bad thing. And that's the choice you make with that reinforced structural integrity card that you saw him use earlier in the turn. And finally, let's make a turn here with the Delphinus. He's got 6 inches left in his movement, or between 4 and 6, depending on what he wants to do. So there's 1 turn. So let's do 3 inches. And now he's got 1 to 3 inches left in his movement. He's going to make 1 more turn and fly by the Mackerel and put a few plasma cannon shots into him. And that's a critical hit. Reactor damage ×1, so he's lost a reactor point, and of course, taking a point of hull damage. So because the Delphinus' engines are damaged, he can do one more turn in place here at the end of his movement, and that will then end his activation. Here we go. Now for the last activation of the turn, the Heragul Empire is going to activate their fighters. Fighters don't have to go last in turn, but often tactically that's the best time for them to be used. But here we go. You can activate up to 8 individual fighter tokens, and the Heragul have 7 at the moment. We're going to do the first 12-inch movement. For 3 of them are going to go after the Draco right there. And then at this point, we're going to have the other guys do their first 12-inch movement, and they're going to go after the Delphinus. So with a little bit of luck here, the Heragul Empire can do some nice damage to the frigates. So let's start here with the first round of combat. We're going to do precision attacks from the Heragul hunters onto that Surikari Draco. Now, had the Surikari Draco not already fired its anti-fighter weapons to shoot down missiles back here, it would be able to engage the hunters first and try to shoot them down and disrupt their attack. But since it's already fired, the Heragul hunters go straight through. Now with precision attacks, each fighter gets 1 die. We want to see 5s and 6s for success. Hey, look at that. That's a nice roll there. 2 6s. You're not going to complain about that. Now with each precision attack, the Heragul player draws critical damage cards until they get 2 unique cards. So we have, already, we have a choice of armor damaged and sensors damaged. So once again, we have a choice for the first precision attack of armor damaged versus sensors damaged. Now, armor damage is a heck of a lot more powerful of a card, so we're going to choose that one and apply that one to the Surikari Draco. Now, one thing about precision attacks is that these types of critical damage do not inflict hull damage like the normal weapons do unless you choose a hull damage card. All right, so that's the first one. Second precision attack. Let's see what our choices are. Not as great, but reactor damage ×2. That's still a pretty nasty card. Or sensor damage ×2. We're going to choose sensors damage ×2. That's going to knock out the sensors on the Draco and therefore narrow that gap of sensor damage or sensors between the Surikari and Heragul fleets. And that's going to finish up the precision attacks here for the Heragul Empire, but they still have 2 other fighters back here, which are bombers, as well as 2 hunters that are escorting those said bombers. Now in the back here, we've got 2 attack cruisers, which are the bombers for the Heragul Empire. They carry light rails, which are capital ship grade weapons. They roll dice and attack just like capital ships. 3 pluses. 1 hit. And they do critical damage like normal, so we need a 4+ to do a critical hit to the Delphinus. And that is a critical hit to the Delphinus from the bomber. So these bombers can be pretty messy for relatively cheap cost. Sensors damage ×2. There's the other sensors damage ×2 card. So they just shot out the sensors on the Delphinus as well. So that just cut the number of sensor points available to the Surikari fleet in half, just like that. That's a very nice hit there. And that's going to bring the total of critical damage on the Delphinus up till 5. So it's getting pretty close to even having that warship be destroyed. Let's roll the next attack cruiser. Once again, 3 pluses. 1 hit and a 4+ for criticals. No critical this time though. So unfortunately that one doesn't come through. But still, doing 2 points of sensor damage to a Surikari warship is always good. Fighters get to make 2 12-inch movements. In this case, they can fly in, attack, and get out. Because they weren't disrupted or damaged, they can just fall back. And that's what they're going to do. They're going to fall back over this direction to seek cover from their warships. So fighters are very agile in Heroes of the Heragul. A lot more than they were in first edition. And that's going to give them a little more tactical flexibility, and also a lot more survivability on the battlefield than you might have seen in first edition of Legends of Caledagia. And it's going to go back now to Surikari to activate one of their remaining units. Activating, okay, recording and recording. All right, for the next Surikari activation, the second to last of the turn, we've got the Corona Destroyer right here. And one thing it's going to do, it's just like the rest of its fleet, it's going to go ahead and make a port turn so it can keep up with the rest of its squadron. Now, one thing that's very important in Legends of Kaladesh, Heroes of the Heragul, is squadron level tactics. You want to try to keep your squadron together, because if they start getting isolated, which kind of happened a little bit to Surikari, you're going to take a ship out of the battle for a turn or two, and that's going to allow the enemy squadron to then concentrate firepower on what's left, do more damage to those guys, while taking less firepower back in return. So as you noticed here, if I move the camera over just a little bit, you're going to see the one Corona is way out of position. So this Corona is going to dive into the mix of combat here, hopefully do some serious damage to the battlecruiser, or possibly take out the Mackerel to try to even the odds the next round, because that Corona over there is going to be out of the fight, because he's just in a bad spot. So here we go. This Corona is in relatively good shape, minus the fact that its main weapon is damaged. It's moving 12 to 14 inches, and I said it's activating a port turn, and it's currently got a B turning ability. So let's start here. He does. All right. And from his position over there, he has range to both the battlecruiser and the Mackerel. Time to finish up the firing with the Surikari Corona, and then finish his few turns that he has left. He has 3 turns he can make if he wishes to. First, he's going to fire his medium plasma pulse beams at the battlecruiser. This is not his biggest weapon, but he's going to fire these first, because tactically, with his biggest weapon being damaged, if these miss, he wants to use that sensor point that's left on the battlecruiser to go ahead and re-roll the weapons here that have a better chance of hitting. So 2 dice, we're looking for 3 pluses. They both hit, they both get a solid hit. This is the first time we've seen a beam weapon do that all turn. Now, when a beam weapon scores a solid hit, they get an additional power die. So we've got, instead of 4 power dice being 2 medium plasma pulse beams, he's got 6. Let's check the battlecruiser over here. Does he have any reactor tokens available? He does. So he's going to spend his last reactor token for the turn to overcharge his armor and cut that down to only 3 dice. Because remember, he has armor compromise now, which means you critical damage the battlecruiser on a 4+. And that's 2 criticals against the battlecruiser, who just is already taking a pounding. Hull damage, so it's 1 extra point of hull damage, and sensors damage times 1. So he said no more sensor points, and he took an extra point of hull damage. He's at 6 points of hull damage, which frankly for a battlecruiser isn't a lot. The battlecruiser for the Heragul has 17 points of hull damage. They can take a lot of damage before it goes down. Okay, now his main heavy plasma pulse beam, just take a shot at the battlecruiser. Need a 5 because it's damaged. Hey, it hit! You didn't even need to use that sensor point. All right, that does. Now normally with a normal weapon, a 5 would be a solid hit with a beam weapon, giving him an extra power die here. But given the fact that the keep burping here. Let's stop for a moment. Given the fact, though, that the weapon is damaged, you got to roll a 6 to get a solid hit for a damaged weapon, so he does not get that bonus power die. So 3 dice, looking for 1 4+. He got a 5 there. That would be a critical hit to the battlecruiser. And what does he do? Reactor damage times 1. Well, it could be a lot worse for the battlecruiser. Trust me, there's a lot worse cards in that deck right now, and he's hoping none of them come up. But at this point, the Surikari player is done firing at the battlecruiser because he wants to try to really just finish off that Mackerel if it's possible. So his little guns are going to fire at the Mackerel. 4 dice. So we're looking for 3 pluses for his 4 combat arc mounted plasma cannons. Whew, 1 hit. Oh, sorry, there's a 3+ there. 2 hits. So the Mackerel does not have any reactor points left. They're either damaged or used up. So he's got to take the hits. And that's 2 critical hits to the poor Mackerel. Engines damaged, which are already damaged. So his engines are now destroyed. He has no engine points left to use. Oh, man, we already had that card just came up a moment ago, but unfortunately it can't affect it anymore. So the second engine damage card that was just drawn, this turn has no further effects. The first one would already destroy his engine. The second one just has no further effect. He's kind of lucky there. Man, that one against the battlecruiser, that would have taken that battlecruiser down, but he didn't do it that way, and that's what happens, right? So, 2 more points of hull damage to the Mackerel. It's getting pretty close to its limit. If it takes 2 more points of hull damage at all, there's going to be a check to see whether it blows up. But its engines are destroyed, so it's more or less out of the battle at this point. Not yet, but it's in pretty bad shape. It's got one thruster point to maneuver, so yeah, it got hit pretty bad this turn. Anyway, the destroyer has 2 more plasma cannons to fire, working for 3 pluses. And that's 1 hit. We got 1, 3. Let's see if we can roll a 4+ to mess with the Mackerel, and it does. That poor Mackerel. All right. Armor damaged. Its armor is not damaged, so now it is, which means that the warship can only overcharge its armor once per turn. Destroyer has 3 more turns that it can make, and then it'll end its activation. At the beginning of the Corona's activation, there's 2 fighters in contact with it, but both of those fighters were disrupted, and disrupted fighters cannot escort the warship, so therefore the earlier attacks in the round from the battlecruiser against the Corona's escorts basically stripped those escorts off, and now the Corona no longer has any escorts along with it. Now in future turns, these fighters can move up alongside of it if they wish, but for the time being, it does not have any escorts. The last activation for the Surikari now will be their fighters. Once again, they don't have to go last, it just happened to be tactically that's how it worked. Now the goal of the Surikari this turn was to take out that Mackerel, and they didn't quite do it. It's still alive and still a risk to fighters, and because of that, the Surikari still can't assume they have fighter superiority. So while they could send their fighters over there to get into a big dogfight with the Heragul fighters, it's kind of, you're going to be leaving their warships still unescorted. So what they're going to do is just as a safe procedure here. There are 3 fighters that were basically by themselves to start a turn. 2 of them are going to go escort the Corona. 1 of them is going to go and start escorting the Draco. As for the 2 disrupted fighters that began the turn escorting the Corona, because they're disrupted, they can only move 6 inches, but after they move about 6 inches, that's going to clear their disruption status, and next turn they'll be able to activate normally, but they really want to get away from that ship over there, which is the Hammerhead, because the Hammerhead can go ahead and shoot them pretty quickly to start the turn and do more damage to them. So they want to make sure they're out of the anti-aircraft range of the Hammerhead over there, which they are. Unfortunately, they're probably still in anti-aircraft range of the Mackerel as well as the battlecruiser, but that's the best they can do at this point. All the activations have been completed. We move on to the end phase. This is where a few things happen. First and foremost, we have some sensor points to clean up. So there's a few sensor points over on this Corona. The other Corona has a sensor point on it, as well as the battlecruiser still has 1. Sensor points do not carry over from turn to turn, so if you don't use them, you lose them. And finally then, we'd go across each of the stat cards and remove any used reactor tokens. Damage still obviously remains, but the reactor tokens, those get taken off. And finally, we move missiles. There's 2 still left on the board here with a battlecruiser. And keep in mind, here's the Delphinus, the good old anti-missile guy, who's got these 2 ships pretty well protected. And so he's going to move them all the way across the board over here to the other Corona, which granted has a lot of fighter protection, but there's actually a chance they'll get through instead of basically sending them to immediately die at the hands of the Delphinus. It's got that little area really well covered. All right. So that's going to end turn 2 of this game here for Legends of Caladagia. And in case you are wondering, once you got the rules down and the basic idea of the tactics, a game of this level, which is around 65 points, can be played in about 2 hours, maybe a little bit less once you get really good at it. So obviously this video took a lot longer because I'm explaining a lot of the details at the time, but like I said, a game of this scale is about 2 hours. Drop down to 150 points, you can probably play in about 90 minutes. And of course, if you guys get a couple starter sets, all your friends buy into the game, you can play much larger battles that could probably take all day if you really want to do that kind of thing. Because yes, people do enjoy playing those kind of epic scale games with these miniature games, and it perfectly is fine with Legends of Caladagia. Ideally though, the game is designed per player to work with about 4 to 6 warships per player. That's a pretty good level to manage. But of course you can have teams of 3-4 players and just have all sorts of crazy fun with this. And once again, this is a miniatures game, so feel free to experiment with different scenarios. There's no reason you just have to make them, one-on-one, one side versus one side, battle to the death. You can do all sorts of different fun, crazy scenarios. So feel free to experiment with those. And future expansions of Legends of Caladagia will certainly include new ways to play this game and allow you to try out different interesting, unique tactics. So with that, once again, I'm Jason, the creator of the Caladagia universe. Thank you for watching, and hopefully you'll enjoy Legends of Caladagia, Heroes of the Heragul.